Season 5 of Youth Justice Transformation in Action. We are the National Resource Center for the Transformation of Youth Justice, working to transform systems in partnership with people like you who are committed to improving outcomes for youth, families, and communities. I'm Jody Martin, Deputy Executive Director.
And I'm John Tuell, Executive Director.
This season, we're in conversation with leaders shaping the field of youth justice, from judges and system leaders to researchers and academic voices. Together, we'll examine the policies, practices, and innovations driving change, and what they mean for the future of youth justice. In today's episode, More Than a Name, the Gault Center, and the Future of Youth Defense, our guest is Mary Ann Scali, the Executive Director of the Gault Center. Today we're talking about the 1967 Supreme Court ruling that gave the organization its name, why INRI Gault remains as relevant as ever, and what it looks like when youth defenders are doing this work at its best. The Gault Center is a national organization that has spent nearly 3 decades supporting youth defenders and pushing for a legal system that treats young people with the rights and dignity they deserve. As we mark the 60th anniversary of that landmark case, it felt like exactly the right time for this conversation.
Welcome, everyone, to Season 5, Episode 2 of Youth Justice Transformation in Action. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our special guest, Mary Ann Scali, who serves as the Executive Director of the Gault Center. She tirelessly and passionately works with youth defenders and advocates who are dedicated to promoting justice for all children and youth by ensuring excellence in youth defense. Mary Ann began her professional career with the National Juvenile Defender Center, known as the Gault Center since 2022, by working as a summer law clerk 30 years ago. Fortunately for the Gault Center and the field, she subsequently became the Deputy Director in 2000 and has held the position of Executive Director since 2017. Prior to joining the Gault Center, Mary Ann defended youth in the Juvenile Division of the Office of the Public Defender in Baltimore City, Maryland. Among other experiences outside of the United States, that's shaped an impressive history of commitment, dedication, and leadership. Mary Ann holds a JD and MSW from Loyola University Chicago, and we are thrilled to have Mary Ann as our guest today. Mary Ann, it's great to see you. We look forward to the conversation today, and I need to turn the floor over to you to tell a little bit more of your own self-introduction of your current title, your role, and some more about the experience in the field that's led you to where you sit today.
Thanks so much, John. And just want to thank you for inviting me into this episode today. And John, as a leader in this field yourself, I've known John since very early on. So it's a delight and hysterical that he would point out that, yes, it really has been 30 years, with 1996 when I was a law clerk for our founder, Patty Puritz, at what was then the American Bar Association Juvenile Justice Center. So it's a delight to be with you here today. And your description of my title and my background is right on. But what got me here is an interesting question. So in my early years, I did think that I was going to be working in international children's rights. I had taught high school at a agriculture and trade school on the island of Pohnpei in Micronesia right after graduating from college. And then I spent a year working at the Jesuit Refugee Service in Rome, Italy after that. But then when I went to law school at Loyola Chicago, as you mentioned, one of my summers, I was a law clerk for our founder, Patty Puritz. And she just one day, kind of came up to my cubicle and she said, what are you going to do with yourself after you graduate from law school? And I said, well, I'm thinking I really want to do international children's rights. And I think this is such critically important work. And she looks at me and she said, well, that is critically important work. But do you know what we do to children in this country? Do you know that we incarcerate children at the highest rate of the world? And this was 1996. So she said, and do you know that we execute people? We execute people for things that they did before the age of 18, and that we're one of the only nations in the world that does that. And that we lock children up in places that we would never put our own children. And so I'm not saying what you want to do is not important, but have you looked at what we do here? And truly, from that moment forward, I shifted, and I have been in youth defense and advocating with and on behalf of young people for their rights pretty much since that moment. And that's how I got here.
And obviously, I've known you for many, if not all of those years. And as I mentioned in the introduction, your passion, add to that your knowledge At this point, we get to say your experience and your commitment is laudable. And I'm so glad that we get to learn more about your perspectives regarding our past and our future regarding youth defense. Mary Ann, I think you may have given us just a little insight because I also knew Patty Puritz during the Models for Change Systems Reform and Juvenile Justice Day sponsored by the MacArthur Foundation, and of course under a different name. But what inspired or further inspired the creation of the current Gault Center? And tell us a little bit about the journey of evolution over the past 30 years of the organization.
So truly, creating what was then the National Juvenile Defender Center was Patty Puritz's keen awareness that there was no central support space or home for attorneys and advocates who were defending the rights and interests of young people. So back then, the organization was part of the American Bar Association. Patty ran what was then the Juvenile Justice Center at the ABA. And she hired me in the year 2000 to be the deputy director. And when I came on as her law clerk, I learned about this big gap in support. And I was there in 96, but in 93, Patty had partnered with her colleagues from the Youth Law Center and the Juvenile Law Center to launch the Due Process Advocacy Project, which was a grant from OJJDP right around the time when you were there, John. And it led to research and a publication of what was the very first assessment of access to and quality of youth defense. And it was called A Call for Justice. And so our partners did a look at 10 different states and what access to and quality of youth defense looked like back in the late 1990s. And despite the fact it was almost 30 years since Gault, right? Because Gault was 67. This was, in the mid to late 90s. Many young people were waiving their right to counsel. Most states did not have a system to create specialized youth defense. And there was really an absence of any attention to what was happening with young people's being afforded their constitutional right to counsel. So Call for Justice was released in 95. By 97, Patty had said, we are going to create a national community. We are going to create a specialization. And she established a set of regional centers in 1997 with people who were doing youth defense across the country, but really weren't part of a community. So we had 9 regional centers, each then run by co-directors who were volunteering, whether they were at a clinic or a full-time public defense office. And then she also imagined the very first Youth Defender Leadership Summit, which was hosted at Northwestern University back in 1997. So this is actually in 2026. It's our 30th anniversary summit. But at that very first summit that I had the privilege of being at, people came together and it was like a family reunion where people realized they were related and they didn't know each other. Right. So everyone said, you want to do youth defense? You want to help protect children's rights? You know what's happening in this nation with young people being locked up and not having access to counsel. And they created a family. And this family of youth defenders has grown over the past 30 years to now thousands strong. And now across the country, public defender offices, clinics have youth defense specialization all across the country. And that's really because Patty saw this need to create a home for this specialized advocacy because young people's rights are not the same as adults' rights. Yes, they're based in the Constitution, but we're based out of the 14th Amendment due process rights. And it's a whole different set of laws. And what young people experience in the system is something that they need specialized advocates to be fighting against. In 2005, we left the American Bar Association with some funding from OJJDP and also the Open Society Institute back then. And we created the National Juvenile Defender Center. What's really cool about the year that we left, which was 2005, was that on March 1st of that year, the Supreme Court handed down Roper v. Simmons. Now, for those of you who remember this idea, we ended the death penalty for children.
And it was a fantastic ruling at the time. I think at that point, we were starting to emerge from the darkness of lack of understanding of adolescent development and developmental reform. And certainly, we can only applaud the fact that this 97 meeting occurred at Northwestern University and that family of committed defenders came together and helped create what has been born from those meetings. I would just say, Mary Ann, as we contemplate where we are today, and I think you and I would likely agree, there's still a long journey before we get to the finish line we both seek. Thank God for that coalition then, and for what has evolved from that point to serve the interests of youth according to their constitutional rights and those designations. And thank God for the Roper v. Simmons decision as well that gave us guidance. I appreciate that historical account, but there's more that I think can really be raised up from the history of what is now the Gault Center. And that's a name that's rooted in the landmark case regarding Gault. Mary Ann, can you tell us why that case remains so central to the work of youth defenders today and the Gault Center?
So the case is so critical because it was the acknowledgement and affirmation that young people are different and young people have a right to access to counsel, right? So the role of youth defense and really a whole system of engaging young people grew out of this case from 1967. So, very early on in our history, like as early as 1948, the Supreme Court had said kids are different, probably they should have a lawyer when they're being interrogated. But then in 67, finally they said, oh, wow, a 15-year-old got 6 years of secure confinement for making a prank phone call without a lawyer and without a bunch of rights. That's a problem. So under due process and the 14th Amendment, they said young people have a right to notice, or privilege against self-incrimination, right to confront and cross-examine witnesses. And then for us, critically, they said young people have a right to counsel. And so the reason that case is so important is because that case affirmed young people's right to be represented by a lawyer, especially trained lawyer, that must be appointed for them when they face charges and arrest in the legal system.
I'd like to ask you to give us an overview of the Gault Center now and its strategic priorities that are born out of that history that you just detailed. The Gault Center's homepage articulates its statement of beliefs, articulates a clear set of guiding principles. I believe those have emerged clearly from N. Ray Gault and the history of this fraternity of public defense that protects the constitutional rights of our youth. But tell us about the strategic priorities that evolve from that.
Thanks, John. And thanks for mentioning the website. So a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about now can be found on our website, which is defendyouthrights.org. So our organization, our mission has been and continues to be that we are dedicated to promoting justice for all children by ensuring excellence in youth defense. And we ensure excellence in youth defense through 4 strategic priorities. One is what we've said already is youth defense specialization. And why does that matter? It matters because in order to be an effective youth defender, we all need to understand adolescent development. We also need to understand the differential laws that are applied to children. And adults can't be locked up for their own good. And the law in this country pretends that it's for a young person's quote unquote own good for them to be locked up before they've ever been found guilty of anything. So a specialized youth defender is essential, and we have a range of resources, a curriculum and training standards that we've created, our summit, our assessments to ensure specialization in youth defense. And all courts should have specialists in adjudicating and looking at young people. Our second strategic priority is youth rights and equity. So you can't spend a day in the juvenile court system without understanding that there are critical disparities in people's responses to youth behavior. And those disparities are often based on race. And so we've created a set of materials for youth defenders and advocates to confront structural racism that's within the juvenile legal system and the other system that young people have to navigate in their lives. We recognize that there's implicit bias and disproportionate treatment of marginalized and young people of all different manners. We see in the legal system that young people are treated differently based on their race and based on many facets of their identity. And so youth rights and equity is a critical component of the work that we provide and the training that we do. And in 2019, we created the Racial Justice Toolkit, which is its own space on our website that provides a range of resources and materials. And we also launched the Ambassadors for Racial Justice program to give youth defenders an opportunity to create projects that really get at structural racism and biases that are embedded and baked into the legal system. Our third strategic priority is defender-driven advocacy. And, when we started the youth defense awareness work, people said that adolescent development had no space in advocacy, right? It was all about the law. And then the community, as you saw, through Roper v. Simmons and a litany of cases, made sure that people are aware that young people are different. They also didn't think that defenders had a place at the policy table, which is why defender-driven advocacy is so important. Youth defenders have a frontline seat in how policies impact young people's experiences in court. So they speak from a young person's perspective and experience on policy. So it's critical that our community is prepared to and is at the policy table and working on issues. And of course, the work that happened to eliminate the death penalty is the prime example of early work that the youth defense community engaged in policy. And then finally, our fourth strategic priority is youth, family, and community partnerships. And honestly, this is the space we have the most opportunity for growth. This work contemplates youth defenders in partnership with young people and communities, really shifting the power in courts to ensure that communities are at the table to provide supports and develop community safety with young people outside the legal system. And we have some beautiful partnerships with groups like Progeny in Kansas and the Connecticut Justice Alliance in Connecticut and Philly in Philadelphia. And we hope to grow those across the country.
So, Mary Ann, we've had the privilege at the National Resource Center of partnering with you in grant projects. So we're familiar with many of these specialized tools, training, technical assistance that you provide, and it makes an enormous difference in the system's performance when you have defense trained to these set of standards. I just want to raise that up. These are not just references to 4 strategic priorities and some of the things that you've developed to ensure specialization in youth defense. It's making a change in actual practice moving forward. That's our belief. And you continue to be an active resource for youth defense and defenders and anyone working to protect youth rights to reform the juvenile legal system. What does that support actually look like in practice? How would you describe that, Mary Ann, for our audience?
So primarily, John, our work started in focusing on specialization, and specialization is rooted in youth defenders having the training and understanding of their role in youth defense, right? And primary to their role in youth defense is that we are expressed interest advocates, which means youth defenders are advocating for what young people say they want and young people's perspectives, but their theory of the defense is that they're active participants in their case. And so in order for us to do that work, our 9 regional youth defender centers really inform the pieces of work that we develop and grow. So we take direction from the field, and then we build resources to advance the issues and work that we're hearing about are critical to our community. And we understood early on that there was no specialized training for youth defenders. People might have a program on defending children. We created an entire program, a 42 lesson curriculum called the Youth Defender Advocacy Program that creates a specialization in youth defense and youth advocacy. We also created a set of national youth defense standards. And both of these, we are very grateful to the MacArthur Foundation. It's a project, John, that you and I worked on together. The MacArthur Foundation's Models for Change dedication in and of itself acknowledge the critical importance of all of us in this space, in the youth justice ecosystem, engaging in practice that was specialized and focused on young people and what it takes for young people to thrive, which is supportive, healthy communities. So we had our standards, we had our YDAP, which is our training curriculum. We certified trainers to deliver the curriculum. We launched, in addition to Summit, a summer academy, this intensive week-long program to create specialization. And we've launched a range of resources, including a set of youth defense system standards. We've done assessments in 29 states. The findings in those assessments give guidance to everybody across the country, what's needed in order for young people to have access to quality defenders. They need specialized training and they need supports. The systems themselves have to dedicate to youth defense and youth defenders. And so the system standards create a set of standards for doing that as well.
We're at the 60th anniversary of Henry Gault. So again, your experience is so vast. Your organization, as you mentioned, has a reach across the country. I'd be interested to understand what your perspective is on what it looks like on the ground when youth defenders are doing this work well, building real bridges between young people and their communities rather than deeper involvement into the legal system. What's your take?
So I love this question because what does it look like when youth defenders are doing this work well? It looks like you have well-trained, well-resourced youth defenders who are working in holistic defense teams, who have access to community supports and community resources outside the system, and also have access to mitigation specialists and experts and funding to do investigation and analysis in each of their cases. A critical piece of this that we're focused on for Gault at 60 is raising awareness about the role of youth defenders in creating public safety. So the dialogue that we hear right now, everyone's focused on public safety, and the narrative about young people in public safety is not good. It's also not accurate. Young people are our future. Young people have to thrive in the communities, and we all have a role in making that happen. Youth defenders' role in making that happen in our Gault at 60 work is helping to highlight our ability to connect to community-based alternatives to court. And we want to share stories about youth defenders connecting young people outside the legal system. And we want to actually elevate those stories so that there's more dialogue about young people succeeding and young people thriving, which is the majority of youth that we see and know who come into this legal system. We know the majority of young people who come into the system come in for engaging in behaviors we all naturally engage in as adolescents. And instead of criminalizing adolescents, we need to help adolescents thrive and provide those supports that are available in the community. So we have a three-part strategy around Gault at 60. One is creating a community asset map. So we're literally crowdsourcing with our community. Where are these community strategies that you're partnering with today so we can help other defenders and judges and policymakers see what it looks like when young people are thriving in their community? So community asset map is strategy one. The second part of it is we're going to highlight community celebrations. So that means youth defenders, probation officers, judges, community members lifting up what is working effectively to help young people thrive. And for us, that's looking at where is youth defense supported and where are youth defenders enabled so that they can create this bridge from outside the legal system toward communities. And really looking at youth defenders as bridges to community safety and embracing that interconnectedness. And then the third part, of course, is national celebrations. Like we invite everyone, national organizations. We hope we get resolutions from states, potentially even from Congress, to really recognize how critically important it is for youth defenders to be supported and strengthened. Ultimately, John, we're hoping in the long run that we dismantle what's harmful about the system, strengthen what's in communities, and we are A-okay if at the end of the day, we work ourselves out of a job.
So, Mary Ann, where are we in mission achievement? This is such an impressive array of tools and resources that have been operationalized among so many youth defenders, among so many communities across the country. Where are we in your vision of mission achievement for the Gault Center?
So it goes right back to where we started with the Supreme Court not just acknowledging, but affirming a differential jurisprudence for young people, right? We started with Roper v. Simmons that abolished the death penalty for children in 2010, based on that same research that kids are different. Juvenile life without parole could not be imposed for non-homicide offenses. Then our case, the youth defense community brought a case from the delinquency courts saying, you know, when a young person is surrounded in a school with a door closed and there's a bunch of people in there questioning them, they probably should be thinking about how old this young person is when they administer Miranda, right? That case says law enforcement has to consider age for purposes of whether to administer Miranda. So that's JDB in 2011. From there, we've had several other cases acknowledging and affirming adolescent development. And that affirmation of adolescent development gave us hope to push on many other issues. For example, racial justice. We know that our community, just as we moved forward with adolescent development, and people said that has no space in the court. People said racial justice has no arguments in the court. Our community is making those arguments based on the tools that we created and provide in our racial justice toolkit. and they are gaining traction in winning in cases across the country. Many people have heard of the adult case in Massachusetts, Warren. There are cases in the youth legal system where we see the court must recognize how bias impacts people's behavior and as part of decision making. So we know we're making gains on that as well. Many other issues we've made progress on. People didn't know that young people were shackled in court well after adults weren't. We've gone from only a handful of states not shackling children in court to now only 10 states left. This year, Virginia was added to the list of states that eliminated indiscriminate shackling of children in court. Working on many other things moving forward that incorporate these arguments, the research showing that children are different and we must respond differently.
Well, we have no better expert than you and the organization you lead to continue to take us closer to the path of no states and total mission achievement in this arena. I have a curiosity question as I listen to you. Is your approach collaborative in nature? I know you represent the interests of public defenders and public defense. Can you answer how it is that you impact other stakeholders that are critical to being able to implement these kinds of reforms?
Thank you for asking this question, Don. And I'm sorry that I didn't talk more specifically about our partnerships across every decision maker in court should be specialized. And so we've worked together on projects where we've asked prosecutors, probation officers, judges to all make a statement about the importance of specialization. And we have that statement on our website where we work together to say everyone has to have this education and specialization. So we do training for judges, we do training for probation officers. Sometimes we do trainings with prosecutors or law enforcement, because we know that everybody making developmentally informed, racially just decisions impacts every young person who's in the court system. So those partnerships are essential.
And those partnerships will inevitably lead to longer-term sustainability of these positive reforms that we lead. Maybe that's an editorial on my part, but by your head nod, I believe we agree on that principle.
We absolutely agree. What's most important is sustaining forward progress.
Yes. So, Mary Ann, speak to some of the biggest challenges that youth defenders are facing right now. And again, articulate with a little additional detail the Gault Center and their efforts to work with them to meet those particular prioritized challenges.
As we approach the 250th anniversary of this case, I think it's really important to understand what freedom looks like and doesn't look like for young people in this country. The constitutional rights of children, and many, are under attack right now. Our young people who have families who are in immigration have great fears. There's an increase in AI surveillance that people aren't even aware of that's impacting young people every day from the minute that they walk out their front door, they get to school and in school. So the things that we're trying to address right now are those emerging issues. We've created a transformative policy initiative to really focus on the policy issues our community is telling us about. And of course, those policy initiatives, when you talk about partnerships, it's essential for us to be partnering across. When we think about issues that are in our policy space, like detention and the conditions, we currently have more than 24 pieces of class action litigation on conditions issues, John, because how we're treating young people in the legal system in the care of states and localities, right? Everybody has a responsibility for that. Community members, judges, people in those facilities, we all need to be doing. So we're creating resources for people to push up against that. Transfer children to adult court. Since 1997, the CDC has told us that transferring children to adult court is bad public policy, and yet and still we continue to do it. So we're creating additional resources to push back on transfer. It does not enhance public safety, it hurts it. We're also looking at issues about age of jurisdiction. People aren't aware. I had a call the other day where I told someone that when I was a youth defender, we had an 8-year-old come into court. And they said, that can't be legal. In the majority of states, there's no minimum age of prosecution. How can that be possible? So these are the critical issues and challenges that we're working on, and we're building policy and training to really equip our community in partnership with young people in their communities to push back on these issues.
Mary Ann, the National Resource Center's work is in multiple jurisdictions. We're currently active in multiple projects, and we would acknowledge that we have a long way to go to fully protect the interests of these young people. And I would note that throughout your answers to those who might be saying, where's the discussion about community safety? What I've heard is that this is all about community safety and the individual well-being of youth and the rights of youth, and those are fine being coupled together. They're not mutually exclusive. Mary Ann, looking forward, what projects or activities are you looking at in the year ahead that will continue this advance to better specialization in youth defense and better protection of the rights of youth?
So, John, I love that you talked about coupling youth rights and community safety because they are coupled. What we believe is that when youth rights are adequately upheld, young people will be free to thrive, right? So that's really where we are. And when I think about the future and work ahead, I mentioned Gault at 60, which again takes everyone for us to lean into young people's rights that were afforded in Ray Gault to make sure that they are actually upheld in the manner in which the Constitution intends, which means they need more support. And then the second piece, of course, is the Transformative Policy Initiative. Again, that takes everyone. Policy work takes all of us, communities, people in the system, people out of the system, community organizers, activists, and critically important are people who hold the purse strings. We've got to make decisions that take money out of the carceral structures and put them into community resources and community assets. And one piece of work that we're doing in the year ahead that I'm particularly excited about is our Juvenile Probation Accountability Coalition. And John, what's wonderful about that piece of work is it grows out of our work with you. So many moons ago, we had a request from a jurisdiction to look at their probation order. And there were questions about whether or not some of the conditions on the order were actually constitutional. And what's really cool about that work is that grew from questions from prosecutors, from judges, and probation officers, in addition to defenders. It wasn't just defenders and young people in communities who were concerned about young people's rights being violated on probation. It was everyone's. So when we partnered in several sites, the Gault Center had the opportunity to learn about a range of probation orders and a range of conditions. And ultimately, in 2016, with the help of Jody Martin, who's now on your team, we issued a brief called Promoting Positive Development, the critical need to reform youth probation orders. And we did this work with you and with the Annie E. Casey Foundation to really inform efforts to transform how courts respond to young people's behavior. So our current partnership is really exciting because it includes our partnership with a community-based organization called Yeah Philly. Yeah Philly is youth empowerment for advancement hangout in Philadelphia. And this partnership, together, we are focused on exposing the harms of punishment-based probation and amplifying alternative models and local policies and practices that move beyond this idea of punishment and surveillance, right? And so I always use this example when I talk about this. Right? We all know New Year's resolutions as adults. Everybody makes a New Year's resolution to do something differently. In court, on the day of their hearing, a young person in some places is asked to do more than 25 new and different things right away. We are setting up young people to fail when we do this. And we know it doesn't make sense developmentally. And we also know that many of the things they're ordered to do has no relationship or connection to what actually brought them into court. So the idea of JPAC, the Juvenile Probation Accountability Coalition, is to transform what probation is and what it does so that we're actually looking at helping young people thrive, minimizing conditions, really looking at a model order and partnering with communities to uplift supports that help young people succeed. So the JPAC has several different strategies. We had our first launch in January of this year with an op-ed by our partner at Yeah Philly. And our second piece was in March. We did a webinar and we launched our first resource from the campaign called Revolutionizing Probation from Punishment to Community-Led Safety. There's a toolkit that goes along with this and a checklist so people can get involved. And most importantly for this podcast, there is an invitation to everyone to participate in JPAC. Whatever perspective you come from, we want to know in your community, what does probation look like? What do you hope it looks like? And what do we hope the outcomes are? John, the outcomes are the outcomes you and I talk about all the time. We want young people and communities to be safe and thriving. And how do we do that? We take a lot of resources that we know have terrible outcomes inside the system, and we shift them outside the system. And we work on connecting young people to community supports that enable them to grow the skills and capacities that we know all young people have. And we're excited.
You should be, Mary Ann. And again, at the introduction, I spoke about your passion and your commitment. It's evident in your answer. But I hope the audience recognizes that that passion and commitment is coupled with a clear understanding of what the research suggests does help us achieve this kind of community safety, protection of youth rights, realization of the kind of specialization youth defense that supports their basic rights and clearly supports better outcomes. If you're building an initiative like you have around the research with the experience that you have, the training, the technical assistance, we can achieve transformational change in probation practice and certainly in our broader youth justice system as well. I'm grateful that you shared that in such detail. It's important for states and jurisdictions to get involved. This is not a discussion for you just to ask people or to tell people, but it's to inform people how they may get involved so they can realize these kinds of impacts in their youth justice system. So for any states or jurisdictions listening who want to bring this kind of support to their community, where do they start? How do they connect with you, Mary Ann?
As John mentioned at the beginning, I hope people will come to our website, defendyouthrights.org. We also have an address, inquiries@defendyouthrights.org. And then we have our Juvenile Probation Accountability Coalition that you can reach out to directly. We really do believe that it's going to take all of us to shift our response to young people to a more positive, growth-filled perspective on who young people are, who they want to be, and how we can support them to get there.
And despite our disappointments, and I'll say my disappointments for what we continue to see in the field, Mary Ann, I think you and I can acknowledge that over the 30 years, we've seen significant advances, significant progress. We have a journey, we have a road yet to be traveled to get where I think all of us would want. So I encourage practitioners, anyone listening to this, at least become more familiar with the Gault Center's work. This is practical work built on a strong foundation, not only of constitutional law, but of the research that when applied, we achieve the kind of transformational change we seek to accomplish. I still got to ask you, as you have a vision looking forward, with this being our current situation, if you could wave a wand, you could change one thing about the youth justice system, what would it be and why?
Well, John, it's a pretty simple answer. I would decriminalize childhood. We respond to young people in a way no other nation does. We don't let young people make mistakes. Oh, we let certain young people make mistakes, but not others. And we need to ensure that all young people have the opportunities that they need to grow. We need to shift the money out of the legal system and into communities. And we need to work together to support communities that have what they want to be able to support young people in them. So decriminalizing childhood would be my answer, and supporting strong youth defense system would be my strategy to get there.
Outstanding. Mary Ann, looking ahead, let's let you talk about your organization. What are your future hopes for the Gault Center? How do you see the center evolving in the coming years?
So, I love all your questions about partnerships, because my hopes for the organization are that we grow our partnerships, and that we grow our partnerships both inside and outside, and strengthen communities and young people so that we're shifting power from courts to communities and leaning into the strengths that communities have. And I see us, the youth defense community, walking with young people and families toward this horizon where young people are thriving. My hope for the organization is ultimately that someday we won't have the need for a giant community of thousands of lawyers protecting youth rights, because youth rights will be protected in their communities. And we won't use the legal system as a reflex to anything that happens with young people, that will respond in our communities, in our schools, in our homes, with responses that we know create healing, healthy, nurturing spaces for young people to thrive.
As the Executive Director of the National Resource Center, we certainly hope to continue our partnerships, and we're trying to create ideas that might be considered to advance this work in a true collaboration moving forward. Mary Ann, it's been a privilege to be a partner with the Gault Center and recognize all of the impact that you bring when we look at our youth justice system in transformation. We really appreciate you joining us today, Mary Ann. I believe the audience will benefit from the Gault Center and your continued leadership so that youth defense, specialization, youth defense, and our youth justice system is more fair.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much for the invitation. And to everyone listening, I hope that you'll reach out and that we can grow this work in this new way together. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening today. Before we go, a quick update. Our new website has launched. It features improved navigation, updated content, and new tools to better support the field, including our new infographic series on advancing best practices in youth justice, which provides comprehensive and accessible research on the core practices driving youth justice. You can find this and many other resources at nrctyj.org.